Okay, accounting scholars, we talked about the ways of allocating profits and losses associated with partnerships in our last section. We're going to move on to stocks issued by corporations in this particular section to give you a idea of how equity structures are created via the issuance of stock. So let's get started with talking about the different types of stock. Actually, there are two types: common stock and preferred stock. So common stock basically says that all rights of ownership occur when you buy a share of common stock, and you have a residual interest in the corporation. So if the corporation would disband after all debts are paid, you would have a percentage interest associated with the assets associated with that particular entity. Now, there is another type of stock which is called preferred stock. So preferred stock may not have all the rights of ownership as a common stockholder. It may have a subset of the rights. For instance, you could have preferred stock and not have voting rights associated with that particular type of stock. But the benefit of preferred stock to the owner is you have a preference over the common shareholders in terms of dividends and or liquidation. And by that I mean, let's say a company says, okay, we are going to issue a dividend. Preferred stockholders are the first in line, meaning that if there's only X amount of dividends that can occur per stockholder, they are going to get first dibs. They're gonna have their hand in the till of dividends before anybody else. So typically they would get more in dividends than a traditional common stockholder. And or as it relates to liquidation of a company, they are also first in line. After, let's say, a company decides to liquidate itself, a corporation decides to liquidate itself, they would be first in line in terms of all the assets that would be available after all debt obligations have been taken care of. Okay, so make sure you have a clear definition of each of those types of stocks. Okay, so let's talk about some of the common preferences that are given to preferred stockholders. What does it really mean by being preferred as opposed to a common stockholder? Well, the first is something called the cumulative preference. And essentially this is unpaid dividends that must be paid to preferred stockholders before common shareholders receive any dividends. So essentially, again, if there were some dividends owed from the past, or there are just a fixed amount of dividends, the cumulative effect basically says the preferred shareholders would receive those dividends before the common shareholders. Okay, the second preference given to preferred shareholders is preferred shareholders can receive a dividend in excess of the stated amount if the dividend pool is sufficient to pay both groups the stated amount. So let's say the company says, okay, we are going to establish a dividend pool of X, and each shareholder is going to get Y. Well, let's say the preferred shareholders are first in line, they get their Y. The common shareholders are second in line, they get their Y. But then there are some dividends left over. Well, those leftover dividends would typically go to the preferred shareholders if the pool is sufficient to pay both the common and the preferred shareholders. Okay, a third preference of a preferred shareholder is something called callable. And that basically means a corporation can redeem the preferred stock for a predetermined amount of cash. So let's say you invest in a corporation, and you basically say, okay, I'm going to be a preferred shareholder, but my stock is going to be callable, which means that the company who you bought the preferred stock from can basically pay you back for your shares at a predetermined amount. It doesn't matter what the market value of the common stock is, and that's why this could be a good or bad thing. Let's say your preferred shares are callable at $80 a share, and now the common stock value per share is at $100. You would actually be losing $20 per share in that particular case if you took the callable option. Okay, the third area is something called convertible. And that means that a preferred shareholder can convert the preferred stock for another specified amount of debt or equity that is involved with the company. So let's say for some reason you did have a callable option on your preferred stock, and it was at $80, and now the common stock is at $100. You might have a convertible option where you could say, okay, I'm going to actually convert my $80 shares that are callable at $80 to common shares, which are now at $100. That would be called a convertible option. And then the last common preference associated with preferred stockholders is something called redeemable. And that's where the stockholder can turn the preferred stock in for a predetermined amount of cash. Doesn't matter what the market value of the stock is at any given point in time. And here again, you might use this particular option if, let's say, the common stock is at $20 and your preferred stock is redeemable at $50. Well, you'd probably be wise to redeem your stock and take your $50 and put it in your bank account. All right, guys, that's a lot of information. Make sure you've got that all in your notes, and we will see you tomorrow in class. Have a great